Hi there, I'm Andreas Marazis, researcher and project manager at the European Neighborhood Council, and this is the ENC Dev podcast. Today's in-depth discussion is part of a series of podcasts linked to our Beyond Erasmus education, exchanges, and employment opportunities for youth in the EU and Turkey training program. The project is supported by Friedrich Naumann Foundation in Turkey and aims at promoting student mobility beyond the Erasmus Plus framework, youth exchanges, internships, training courses, networking, access to funding, and much more. Now, during today's podcast, which is dedicated to CV writing and interview skills, personal brand building, we will focus on tips and tricks on how to structure a CV that stands out and storytelling experiences that will help youth understand better themselves and how to promote their strengths, among other things. Of course, I'm not going to do that myself. I'm very lucky to have, even though only via Zoom, to have with me two excellent trainers, speakers. I will start with our female speaker, Julie Vandermeulen, who is the founder of Clarity Kit and story marketing consultant. Julie, welcome to the ENC Dev podcast. Really great to have you here.
Thanks, Andreas. Super happy to be here.
And we also have with us Sven Gerst, who is a PhD student in political philosophy at the Department of Political Economy at King's College, London. Sven, welcome to the ENC Dev podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, recently, both of you participated in an online session dedicated to the same topic. And I would like us to, touch a little bit upon the most important points that you raised during your presentation. So I would like to start with you, Sven, and ask you, what are the steps that someone should follow in order to make sure his or her CV will stand out? How can they portray the strengths, avoid being too long and get the job done in, let's say, one page?
Well, the first part where I usually focus on is to understand what the role and the purpose of a CV is. The role of a CV for me is less to think about how to stand out. You will do that as an applicant anyways, but how to not mess it up. Because the average hiring person has around 6 seconds to screen your CV. So you want to follow certain guidelines. And usually we say don't follow orthodoxy, but maybe here you want to follow some general procedures. So in a nutshell, what you should do is do your research before, like what kind of job industry you're applying to and what are the orthodoxies in that field. Like do your research, what are they looking for? And I can share some tips on that later on. Second, look at the general structure that is used so that the person who wants to see your CV understands immediately what you are all about. And then 3, don't mess it up. Go 100 times through it. Don't have any spelling mistakes. Don't use too fancy fonts and whatsoever, but keep it clean so that the person really sees that you are a suitable applicant. So I think this is the general framework that I work with, but we can dive deeper into this if you want.
Actually, we do have time, and you can actually dive more into detail if you like, even now.
Yeah, so I would say if I can deep dive into one thing, then I would say that you don't have to come up with everything from scratch. So when I say do your research, it can also mean that you can actually, I always say like steal like an artist, the famous Picasso quote. You can actually look what are standard CVs in the industry and try to mimic them to a certain degree. Again, you have to understand that especially for university applications or applications that are very competitive, the hiring person has so little time to understand what your CV is about. And so therefore you have to familiarize yourself with the standard structures that are there. So when they look at your CV, immediately they can tell, okay, this is the relevant fields, and they can screen, does it fit my profile or not, right? And you don't want to create this dissonance where people are confused by the CV, even though it might look amazingly pretty and you like hired a graphic designer to do everything. I love creativity, but maybe the CV is not the place where you want to do your graphic design record, and again, I'm just speaking here for academia, for civil society, and for consultancy or business. It might look different in different jobs. In more creative jobs where you want to stand out a little bit more with your creative abilities, that might be different. But again, for the sectors I talk about, keep it clean.
Can I intervene and ask something quickly? I mean, this might be also interesting for you, Julie, to respond, but like when you want to share your story, let's say, to put out like your strengths, I heard that in different business, like taking like a step back and think like as a recruiter, what I would like to see. I mean, apart from like not like a really packed like CV with graphic design pictures, like too heavy, where you're distracted from like actual the getting the the right message from the candidate. Is it better maybe to use just keywords, like to be like really laconic, if I may use a Greek word?
Again, it depends on the style and the habits of the industry. I usually say, yeah, keywords are working in your favor, and that's why I say, like, if there is an offering on the internet, screen that. You can do like through a word cloud generator, you can put the application text or the admissions text in there and can see which kind of keywords are they searching for, and do I meet these keywords, because then you make it easy for the hiring person to let you to the next round. Again, you will be able to shine in the next round when they do a deep dive into your profile, into your personality, and when you get to the interview, that's a different thing and a different purpose than the CV has. The CV, in my opinion, has the kind of purpose of, okay, does it fit the profile, and does this person take careful consideration so they don't mess up, basically. And again, like one remark about the storytelling, I mean, everything is a story, right? And that means that you have to be very careful in what you include and not include, because what you include tells the story. You can't include everything. And so therefore, really carefully tailor your CV to the needs that the recruitment has. And that means sometimes for different employers, different universities, a different extracurricular activity might be relevant that might not be relevant to others. So I'm not a fan of standardized CVs for all industries that you can just send out. Tailor it to the employer, to the institution, and whatsoever. And I think that is the most creative you can get in the whole process, understanding the recruitment person on the other side.
Julie, feel free to add anything if you would like to, to add or pinpoint on what I asked basically from Sven.
Well, to add or maybe even just confirm what Sven is saying, in terms of storytelling, yes, there are thousands of stories you can tell about yourself. But what is the golden rule of storytelling is to find a story that is true for you, but that is relevant for your audience, in this case, an employer that's looking for a certain profile. So indeed, looking at the keywords, looking at, how they are as a business and how they communicate themselves will be very, very important to understand what is relevant to them, and then tailor your story to that. And I completely support Sven's advice of making sure that you probably have a basis of your CV. You're not going to create a CV from scratch every time, but make sure that the story you're telling is tailored to your audience as much as possible.
And lastly, quickly to add on this, also maybe answering fully the question that Andreas had, it's not only about keywords. Instead, I would focus on where you had impact. Like, your story is where you had impact. So if you bring in, like, especially early on in your career, for example, you want to mention some of your internships, and then don't describe what you did. Describe what impact you had, what you changed maybe. And it might be very little, but it already shows the recruiting person that you understand the dynamics, that adding you to the university, adding you to the civil society organization or NGO, or adding you to their business will create impact. That's the story that you want to tell. You're not just there to do a job, but to have impact. And I think that's, the most hack you can get. Like, focus on the impact, what you did, like more clicks on the website, 30% change of reduction of costs, or whatsoever it is relevant to the industry.
If I may add on what you just said, Sven, it took, from personal experience, it took me some time to understand that you don't have to put all these things on your cover letter. You have to also portray these things, these changes, and not focus on pointing out like bullet points, like I did this, I did that, I contributed on that. Yeah, great, congratulations. To what extent you contributed? What was your impact? Indeed, most of us, speaking for myself, I used to do that for quite some time, and I used to add and explain things on the cover letter of how much of an impact I had on doing this and that. So it's not always clear of which tool you should use for what purpose, to be honest.
impact should be felt everywhere. I think that is the key thing, like, because people want to take you in for what you can change and not what you do. And I think that's true for stories. A story is not about what happened, but how you felt when it happened, right? So there is an impact dimension. It's not like a description of facts. That is not a story. It's just a sequence, right? But when you tie that into you as a personality, what you add, that's the impact dimension. And I think you want to especially put that out in every document that a person reads about you.
Yeah, and I if I may add to that, I think it's also a very common best practice in storytelling that yeah, you can tell a story, but before it really lands and gets remembered, it needs to be repeated a couple of times. So make sure that what they read between the lines as a story in your CV, that also comes back in your cover letter and comes back in that first interview that you do. That's super important if you're building a brand or trying to get your brand to convince people to buy something from you. That's also going to be the same case. And here what they're buying is basically your skills, your time, and your knowledge. So it has the exact same dynamics as in marketing. And maybe just a small fun side note to add to the example you gave, Andreas, of you know, maybe just listing what you've been doing isn't so interesting or so relevant. That's true, because the employer is looking for something for them. And if you, instead of listing what you've been doing, which kind of can come across a little bit boring, you list what you've accomplished, which is something that they want to accomplish as well, you're gonna fire up the production of dopamine in the brain. And that's the reward hormone, or maybe better to be called motivation hormone, the hormone that makes people pay attention because there's something they want there. So the sooner you talk about that thing that you can accomplish that they would want, the more attention they're going to give you as well. Yeah.
Okay. Staying with you, Julie, and about storytelling, I wanted to ask you, like, I mean, during the session, we talk about a lot about confidence, about self-awareness. I mean, how can someone boost his or her confidence, build self-awareness, and successfully sell that bright side of himself or herself to the potential, like, recruiter, or potential recruiter, to the potential employer, basically?
Well, it all starts with self-awareness. You're never going to get confidence from pretending you're someone, because we all know this kind of famous or infamous imposter syndrome that actually comes from being an imposter, trying to fake it. So what I always recommend to basically everyone who is looking for a new job or looking to make a change in their life is to make sure that you first spend some time in a conversation with yourself and understand yourself and accept that there are things you might not be good at, but there's a lot of things that you are good at. Once you look inside yourself and just look at those strengths, which is an exercise we did during the training, you quickly find, and we also got that feedback from the students, that there's actually a lot to be proud of and confident about. And fine, there are a lot of weaknesses as well, but let's focus on the strengths, and that's where the confidence comes from.
You mentioned about exercise. I mean, the ones who are listening to the podcast are not necessarily aware of like what exactly we did, but can you please give a little bit of flavor of what exactly these exercises were about, and what was the focus of each of these exercises briefly?
Definitely. So first off, we did an introspection exercise. So introspection means to look inside yourself, or to put your attention inside yourself. And based on a few questions, such as what do I get compliments for, or what is easier for me than for others to do, we helped the students to find out what their strengths are. We didn't have a lot of time. Usually I would recommend people to take at least 20 minutes in silence without other people around. But we took a little bit of time with those questions, and they asked themselves, okay, what are now my real strengths? And this is not just about, you know, I can make good PowerPoint presentations. No, what's underlying is, for example, that you're really good at explaining things in a simple way. And so once they found their strengths, immediately would see that people would be more confident telling a story that they actually felt was true, instead of just trying to tell a story that they think the employer wants to hear.
Julie, staying with you, and then I will extend the question to Sven as well. I want to ask you to give us any practical steps that you have in mind that will help people realize what do they actually like to do in terms of like work, let's say. So maybe a few like bullet points of like things to do before you are actually applying for a position, like as a preparatory procedure, like mental procedure maybe.
Okay, so I got it down into 2 steps. One is make sure you know yourself. The other is make sure you know what they are looking for. And I'll let Sven comment to the second step maybe. But to make sure that you know yourself, all you really need is time with yourself, some peace and quiet. So you don't want to be doing your laundry or talking to someone else while doing that introspection. So take some time for yourself, proper time, and go for a walk, take a notebook, and just simply have that honest conversation with yourself. We do it way too little in general. We are spending all of our time with ourselves, and we actually never have a deep conversation with ourselves, or very rarely. So simply doing that will give you a lot of insights and actually surprises about the things that you're good at, the things that you like, and the things you would like to do more of in the future. And so that's a very simple advice, but it's extremely powerful.
Thank you, Julie. Sven, 3 do's or 3 don'ts actually when it comes to building your CV.
Yeah, I'm first. Let me just a little bit add to Julie's question, because while she was talking, I was thinking like maybe what can I say? Like just for context, I had a very lucrative job with a consultancy, and then I changed to philosophy, an academic philosophy. Like so, therefore, I'm not the best at career choices, I would say. But nevertheless, I think when young people think about career, think about that it is not one-shot game. Okay, it's trial and error. You can change anytime, and therefore, especially in early career, you can try out as much as possible. And there is no shame in abandoning a certain project. If a certain studies doesn't fit you, try something else. Like you have a long time to live on this planet, so therefore you can iterate. Trial and error is the name of the game, I would say. And therefore, to understand yourself, I like Hayek's understanding. He talks about an explorative process. You have to explore, and like through that you have to do stuff. But yeah, that was a more philosophical answer, but I couldn't hold myself back. If it's about the do's and don'ts, as I said, I would say let's start with the don'ts. Don't be cliche is the number one. So don't put like I'm a hardworking team player or something in your description over there. That everybody is that. So that seems to me like a cliche that you could use on better with better words. Then don't be weird. Don't use crazy fonts or unconventional formatting. Don't use your own logo or other logos. So I would say that's a big don't. And as I said earlier, do your research. So no understanding having a standardized process, that would also be a don't. Like if the employer understands, okay, you send it out to 100 universities or organizations, they will understand immediately, because you will do a copy and paste error at one point, believe me, and then you say dear, and then it's the wrong contact person, for example, or whatever, and people can tell. So these are the 3 big don'ts. Don't be cliche, don't be weird, and to standardize when you shouldn't.
All right. I mean, I must admit that I can't get enough of you 2 guys. I really enjoyed the online session. I really enjoyed the podcast discussion. I found it extremely helpful. I mean, I'm sure that our young participants really learned a lot from you guys. I definitely learned a lot, and I saw things from a different perspective. With that, I would like to thank you once again for taking the time to participate in our training program. I really wish we'll have the chance to cooperate once again in the future in other trainings like this one. And yeah, basically, thank you very much, really, for participating. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Andreas. It was fun.
So at this point, our discussion came to an end. I wanted to inform our participants that, or actually our viewers, that the next in-depth podcast is dedicated on access to funding. So stay tuned. I'm Andreas Marazis, and that was the ENC in-depth podcast.